Story 1. I almost drowned while swimming at the beach when I was 9 years old. A rip current grabbed me and pulled me out very quickly. I remember looking back and seeing my mom screaming from the shore, getting smaller and smaller. I was flailing around, panicking, with salt water in my eyes and nose. Luckily, an older surfer spotted me and paddled over. He pulled me onto his board as if it was nothing. I was coughing uncontrollably but alive. Story 2. I got strep throat that somehow turned into an abscess in the roof of my mouth. I could literally see my neck and cheeks swelling. I couldn't get a ride to the hospital, so I walked about 3 miles, stumbling and crying all the way there. They took one look at me and sedated me for a magnetic resonance imaging scan. After that, everything is really hazy, but my doctor told me that I arrived barely in time. They performed emergency surgery to drain the abscess. I still have a scar on the roof of my mouth. The doctor said he drained over 2 pounds of pus, and it continued to drain into my mouth from the incision for about 3 days after surgery. It was very unpleasant. I lost over 30 pounds in less than a week, and it took me 4 months to gain it back. I was only 155 pounds to begin with. A week after surgery, I could barely lift my 20-pound empty bench press bar. It was brutal. Special thanks to the ear, nose, and throat surgeon at St. Mary's Medical Center in Walla Walla, Washington in spring 2004. He almost certainly saved my life. Story 3. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes after experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis and organ failure. I slipped into a coma while being transported to the intensive care unit and was given a 50% chance of survival. I woke up a few days later but did not learn how close I had been to death until weeks afterward. Story 4. Being 50, I have had multiple brushes with death, mainly due to occupational hazards as a paramedic and firefighter. But the closest had to be about a month ago, when I got intoxicated and was about to slide a razor blade down the length of my carotid artery. Then I looked over and saw my 14-year-old dog staring at me. His eyes were full of confusion and fear. As I dropped the blade, he came over to me and rested his head in my lap. Needless to say, I completely broke down sobbing and eventually passed out with him, never leaving my side. That is a completely true story, despite how cheesy it may seem. Story 5. Had a heart attack last September. I felt strange, with random pain across my chest, in my arms, and up to my jaw intermittently over 3 days. The pain would last a few minutes and then go away. On the 3rd day, the pain came on and did not stop. I told my wife I should probably go immediately to the emergency room. I am really glad I did. Story 6. I was prescribed a type of antidepressant called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. These have severe dietary restrictions, and I unknowingly ate something I should not have. Next, I woke up 2 weeks later in the intensive care unit. I had rhabdomyolysis and a temperature over 106 degrees. The doctors were shocked I did not have brain damage. Story 7. A driver cut me off merging onto the highway in his old Kia. I honked and raised my hand in a what the heck kind of motion. I changed lanes. He slowed down and moved behind me, crossed 2 lanes, pulled even, and fired a single shot. It hit the lower window trim and blew the window out into my face. The shot was about 3/4 of an inch from the window. Given how I was sitting, it probably would have hit my neck or jaw if it had gone up just a bit. Story 8. I was refused hospital care while having a sudden miscarriage. I was sent home harshly. I returned 15 days later in septic state. Only then did I receive medical care and attention. Story 9. I had sepsis but didn't know I had sepsis until it nearly killed me. One day, I was trying to fall asleep and felt unusually calm, relaxed, and kind of at peace. Felt like I could actually get a good night's sleep. Even though I felt tired, every time I nearly fell asleep, I would jolt awake and kept hearing in my head, "If you fall asleep, you won't wake up." It was basically my inner voice urging me not to fall asleep. It was really disturbing and unusual. I kept ignoring it at first because I thought, well, there's no reason why I wouldn't wake up. But my inner voice grew louder and suddenly I felt absolute panic. I didn't know what to think. I thought maybe I was just having a panic attack, but I've had them before and they didn't feel anything like this. I went to the emergency room with no physical symptoms, just a feeling like I was dying. I thought either I was really dying or having some kind of psychiatric episode, but in either case, I believed the emergency room would be the safest place to be. In the end, I was right, I was dying. They told me I must have had sepsis for weeks based on how high my white blood cell count was. They said my body was in absolute overdrive fighting it off. My pulse was over 200 beats per minute, and that was mainly why they took me seriously. They rushed me to cardiac critical care. That day I learned that sometimes it is not your anxiety. Sometimes your body is literally trying to tell you something is wrong. In the case of sepsis, impending doom is a symptom. That is what I felt. The irony of the symptom of what was about to kill me also saved me from dying. Story 10. Almost drowned twice. I was hit by a hit-and-run driver while biking and was left in a ditch in very bad condition. I was diagnosed with stage 3 intestinal cancer, which was about to burst when I arrived at the emergency room. I received a stoma bag during that surgery. Then I almost died during chemotherapy because it reacted badly with other medications I was taking for another illness. Later, I had another surgery to remove the stoma bag and reconstruct my intestine, but that also went badly because the stitches opened, and I had to have surgery again just a few hours later. Story 11. When I had the original COVID-19 in the fall of 2020, after being sick for a couple of days, I began to feel like there was a heavy stone on my chest preventing me from breathing. I had quit smoking about 18 months prior and was seriously overweight at the time. I ended up in the hospital but managed to escape without being intubated or dying. Story 12. 18. Spontaneous bilateral pneumothorax. In simple terms, both my lungs began to collapse without any external cause. Story 13. Anaphylactic shock from pine nuts. Body started shutting down. Went blind for 45 minutes. Body temperature dropped to 92 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 33 degrees Celsius. 2 intravenous lines pumping antihistamines and epinephrine. Overnight stay in the hospital. 1 star. Would not recommend. Story 14. When I was about 19, I was the pianist in a college band. On the way back from an away performance, the van we were in was hit on the freeway by a car that had become airborne, going the opposite direction at 65 miles per hour. The drummer in the front seat was killed instantly. There were other fatalities and serious injuries in the crash. When it was happening and the van was rolling on the freeway in the rain, I was certain I was about to die. Luckily, I ended up with only a sore neck. The car that became airborne first hit a taxi directly in front of our van and cut the torsos clean off the driver and passenger. One thing I distinctly remember before getting into the van was singing the Woody Guthrie song, Car Car, which has the verse, I want to sit in the back seat, I want to sit in the front seat, back seat, driving in my car. I had decided to sit in the very back seat of this 9-passenger maxi van, and that was a key factor in me getting no injuries. Story 15. Probably when I almost killed myself a few years back. I had a rough plan and felt as if my death was impending and inevitable in the immediate future. Luckily, my girlfriend recognized this without me explicitly communicating it to her while on FaceTime. She visited the following day and stayed with me for 3 days. I am not sure if I would be here without her today. We are still together, and I love her so much. Story 16. In high school theater, we were changing out items on a backdrop and removed something really heavy. I was sent to put it back up in the flies. It was counterweight and all we had were ropes. I wasn't thinking. Most items were easily balanced, so you just had to gently pull, so I had a hand on the rope when I released the brake. That was a mistake. My hand was clamped on the rope, the counterweight came down, and I went up. I kept letting go, so my hands were burning, but at least I didn't end up 60 feet in the air. I was dangling, trying to let go as the ropes flew through my hands, and I felt the weights fly past my back where I was tangled. I got down, went to the bathroom, and ran my burned hands under cold water for a while and shook. Nobody else even noticed. Story 17. 13 days ago, I had a heart attack. 5 blockages were repaired and a new valve was installed. I work hard, do not smoke or drink, and eat well. My wife is amazing at cooking. I exercise regularly. I had no idea my condition was that serious. Please get your checkups, friends. Story 18. I was bleeding rectally for 3 days following a colonoscopy. The doctor's office would not return my call. I could not stand up, so I had my children take me to the emergency room. The doctor said I was almost out of blood. Story 19. I had a pulmonary embolism followed by a massive stroke. I ended up in a coma. Then I became septic. I experienced cardiac arrest multiple times. I spent some time in the in-between, with part of me still in this world while another part was in the next. I was given a choice and chose to stay, knowing that the road would not be easy, but feeling like I was not quite done here. I was determined to survive and recover so that I could find my purpose. It definitely has not been easy, and there are some days when part of me wonders if I made the wrong choice. But I am slowly getting better. Will I ever be normal? No. But considering where I was, I am happy with my progress so far. Story 20. Accidentally inhaling a toxin at work and almost dying. When a supervisor contacted the manufacturer in Europe, I asked if I was going to die. He said, "They don't know what it does to humans." Story 21. Born dead, struck by lightning once, died 3 times in one night from a serious overdose. Pick one. I promised people I would not die again, so I am not going to test it anymore. Story 22. I had pneumonia a few years ago and did not know until I developed a massive abscess in my chest. It burst the night I went to the hospital, and I had to undergo emergency surgery. I spent a week there with tubes inserted into my chest to drain the large amount of fluid. The doctor said if I had delayed one more day, I could have very likely died. Story 23. I was young, playing at the beach, and I did not know how to swim, but I was with my aunt. I went too deep when the tide pulled me out, and I started drowning. No one knew where I was, so I flailed and freaked out. Then, I calmed down, focused, and started paddling. Slowly, I learned how to swim. I got back to shore but never told my aunt. Story 24. I was floating down the river with 2 friends a couple of years ago. We came to a shallow spot where we needed to get out and walk our tubes. The current was too strong for me to walk across, so I braced myself on a log in the water. My feet were swept out from under me, and I was sucked under the log and pinned. I froze and held my breath. Luckily, my friend was right next to me, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me out. I went under so quickly that my second friend did not even see it happen. I could have easily drowned. Story 25. I had a urinary tract infection with no symptoms except a fever. My urine color was normal and it did not hurt to urinate. I thought I had the flu. I had a 6-week-old baby and a 2-year-old, so my ex-husband made sure I was not around the boys. He checked on me at 9 p.m. to take my temperature and make sure I had cold water and medication. My temperature was 104 degrees Fahrenheit. I was pale, breathing was labored, and I could not move at all. He called my in-laws who lived a mile away, and they rushed me to the emergency room as soon as they arrived. My liver was inflamed and my kidneys were shutting down. I do not remember anything except peace. I was in the intensive care unit for a week and came out with no long-lasting problems. Looking back, if he had not checked on me when he did, I would be dead. I have never had a urinary tract infection before or after that. Story 26. I had a seizure and crashed my car. Luckily, I was at an intersection. If I had the seizure 1 minute earlier, I would have been traveling 70 miles per hour on a major highway lined by trees. Story 27. I had a seizure on the top of some concrete stairs with sharp metal edges. I broke my nose, lost a tooth. It came out clean, without even a crack, and had several stitches across my face and chin. I looked badly injured for weeks. I often think about how I did not have a severe skull fracture or concussion. Story 28. I have had 2 blood clots randomly in my leg calf. After the second one, I was diagnosed with deep vein thrombosis. It was the worst pain ever. Now I have to take blood thinners forever. Story 29. I was crushed between 2 very large moving objects at work. If I had been positioned just a few degrees differently, I would have been drawn between them and killed. Instead, I bounced off one and fell. I was still very seriously injured, but I realized my mortality that day for sure. Story 30. I cut my leg open with a right angle grinder. The doctor told me I missed a major artery by a few millimeters after he stitched me up. Story 31. I had a pericardial effusion, which is fluid in the sac around my heart. By the time I arrived at the catheterization laboratory, I was in cardiac tamponade, and my heart could not pump enough oxygenated blood. I was hours away from dying. Story 32. Early Christmas morning of 2021, my little brother woke me up saying to gather my pets, 2 guinea pigs and a cat, and get out of the house because the carbon monoxide detector indicated deadly levels. We had no idea how long it had been going off before he heard it, considering he is the heaviest sleeper I have ever met. The only detector we had was in the basement where his bedroom is, so he was the only one who would have woken up from it. We had a fire in the fireplace the night before and the flue was closed with an ember still burning. The carbon monoxide entered the floor vent next to the fireplace and spread throughout the house. We got the animals and the whole family out of the house and called the fire department. It was jarring to see 7 men in full hazardous materials suits arriving to investigate. In summary, the whole family almost lost their lives on Christmas morning. Story 33. Class 5 rapids on the Gauley River in West Virginia. Got pitched out and trapped against a large rock underwater. Actually did the roll-in-a-ball technique and got discharged at the end of the run, just in time to get some oxygen. Had more than a few nightmares about it. Story 34. Weaving through traffic on my motorcycle, I had to swerve suddenly to avoid a collision. I was inches away from crashing into a box truck at 50 miles per hour. Story 35. Of the times I have been shot at, the scariest was when I was in an aircraft flying into a base one night. As we were getting lower, we started taking tracer fire. The crew chief came running back and yelled to turn on the lights, as the pilot doused everything else. We started evasive maneuvers and made it back down safely. I just remember thinking, well, this is it, and feeling completely helpless because all I could do was sit there. Story 36. I was pronounced dead at 13 on my front doorstep. When my mom opened the door, I had passed out, possibly due to oxygen deprivation after going ice fishing with a friend, drinking, and then coming home to a heated house. Another ambulance driver, who was new, took over and kept trying until he got a pulse. I was in a coma for 6 3/4 days. I woke up with almost no memory of the 3 months before, including the drinking that led to the situation and resulted in a court-ordered rehabilitation for half a year. I had no memory of any drinking or drug use. Story 37. Fell off a loading dock in 2008. 6 fractured ribs, fractured skull, fractured left clavicle, fractured left scapula. Spent 6 weeks at Massachusetts General Hospital and 2 weeks at a local rehabilitation hospital learning to walk and talk again. Then months of physical therapy followed. It was not a lot of fun. Story 38. I became epileptic and had a violent seizure in my sleep that almost killed me. My air supply was cut off and I was told I turned blue. So they put me on my side and called emergency services. Story 39. I was 4 years old, crossing the street while walking home from the store with my mother and sister. She was 7. I decided to sprint across the street without seeing the semi-truck driving. My sister pulled me back seconds before the truck hit me, and we still talk about it to this day. Thank you, God, for protecting me. Story 40. Seizures and convulsions due to serotonin syndrome, but I decided to sleep it off because I did not want to be an inconvenience. Story 41. I had pneumonia when I was 3 years old. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I do not remember anything, but my poor parents and older siblings are still scarred from it. Story 42. After school, when I was in 5th grade, I was playing catch with a friend. I tried to avoid going to the 2-lane street in front of the school and fell off the division of the road. The next thing I saw was a blue Malibu about 1 meter from my face. Thankfully, the driver reacted quickly and hit the brakes, because if not, I would still be part of the pavement today. Story 43. Ooh, I've got one. You know those partially inflated blobs where people jump on one end to send another person waiting on the other end flying into the air? I'm at the lake for a weekend, meeting some nice people with a houseboat and a blob in the water. The plan is for my friend and me to jump on it simultaneously and launch the 100-pound girl on the other end into the stratosphere. It's 5 p.m., and we have been drinking since breakfast. Hanging off the upper deck rail of the houseboat, we decide to lock arms. We jump, land off-center, and I smack my head into the side of the houseboat. I'm underwater and under the blob. Did you know there's a hard plastic, flat bottom under those? Totally disoriented. Wind knocked out of me from the landing. I'm clawing at the hard bottom. It was a trip, the clarity that appeared. I told myself, "You dumbass, you've been swimming all your life. Open your eyes." So I open my eyes and start swimming through murky lake water toward the light. Lungs burning, I pop up at the back of the boat, maybe 40 feet from where I hit the water. My wife is yelling for me, panicked. I had to take several breaths before I could respond. The scariest experience at the lake of my life. I've been going since I was a kid. This was 2 years ago, and I am 41 now. The stupidest move I have made in my life to this point. Story 44. Slammed into a tree falling asleep from smoking marijuana. Woke up in the intensive care unit. Do not recall the accident. Broken clavicle in right shoulder, fractured right foot, gash in right knee from hitting the lower part of the dashboard, seat belt cut into my large and small intestines, leaving a scar across my stomach. Nurses said firefighters had to use hydraulic rescue tools to get me out of my car because my driver door could not be opened. Learned my lesson. 2 days in intensive care unit, 5 on regular ward, 3 months recovering at home. Worst accident out of many. Surgeon told my parents I am blessed to be alive. Village wanted $500 for their tree damage, which was funny at the end of it all. Story 45. Almost got hit on my bicycle. Some Indian or Middle Eastern-looking man was rushing out of the parking lot area in his Honda sedan. He didn't look like he was going to yield or stop, coming out very fast. He was in a rush. I stopped just in time. He came so close to the sidewalk where I was. I was like, that was close. Story 46. My cousin, uncle, and I were fishing in the Arkansas River. My uncle pulled the boat up to a sandbar. My cousin and I got out to stretch our legs. While walking along the edge of the sandbar, we both sank up to our knees. We pierced the crust of an air pocket. The river reclaimed the sandbar and tried to take us with it. Luckily, we still had on our life jackets. The undertow was very strong. We would have died for sure. Story 47. Probably when I went to a county fair while I was still sick, I felt fine at first before we left. However, a few moments later, I felt hot because it was very warm outside and I was sick. I nearly had a heat stroke. Luckily, I did not, and I am still all right. Story 48. Life is so fragile that some small thing happens every day that almost kills you. Okay, now go have a blessed day. Story 49. Dragged out by a riptide in Mexico. I was 12 years old. I felt my leg kick something that felt like cartilage. I never swam harder in my life. Story 50. My so-called friend came and chased me through the forest with a knife because he had smoked some fake weed and was having an episode. The blade cut my shirt and I had a small scratch on my arm. Nothing major. I ended up picking up a long stick and hitting him with it so he couldn't get close to me, then talked him out of it. We are still friends to this day. Story 51. Carbon dioxide poisoning. I woke up one morning and couldn't breathe. An alarm beeped. After an hour and a half of confusion and deep breaths, I instinctively put on my shoes and clothes and left the apartment. I got to my car as my throat was closing and stayed there for 6 hours. My head started popping and tingling. I experienced difficulty breathing for about a week afterward. I had to walk to a hotel next door and sleep there after the third night of leaving the apartment to stay outside and catch my breath. Then I woke up in the hotel with breathing problems and ran out of the hotel. Walking around the city with no place to go, unable to breathe, and not knowing what was happening was overwhelming. Especially when not dressed for the weather, it was a difficult situation for me and alarming for those around me. Story 52. Donating plasma. I finished the entire process and then started to feel queasy when I was getting replenished. I threw up, had severe ringing in my ears, and everything was muffled. I was sweating heavily, and my heart was pounding. I begged the employees to remove the needle. They did not want to, but eventually did. I was losing control of my bodily functions and needed to be helped to the toilet. I passed out a few times and woke up sitting against the wall. I begged them to call emergency services, but they hesitated. I was taken to the emergency room by ambulance and was forced to sit in a wheelchair without assistance for over 30 minutes before triage attended to me. I wheeled myself to the bathroom multiple times and looked gray, not blue or purple, but with gray lips and gray skin. Once triage took me in, they set up an intravenous line, and I felt my body giving up multiple times. After receiving fluids and some apple juice, I felt fine after 3 to 5 hours. Story 53. I was stabbed 7 times and rushed to a trauma center. It was a matter of seconds before I could have bled to death if the ambulance had not arrived quickly. I have been living with post-traumatic stress disorder since then. Story 54. I had brain surgery when I was 20 due to undiagnosed hydrocephalus. Then, 2 months later, I developed a subdural hematoma because the surgery was too successful. So probably that. Story 55. 1. Tied up on a couch with a gun against my head. Bombing a hill on a bike, only to have a truck pull out of a blind driveway. I jumped at the last second over the side of its hood. Biking past a farm and getting a gut feeling. I turned to see a dog 5 feet behind me, ready to attack. At that same moment, a car hit the dog as it passed me. Story 56. Got drunk one day and rolled my car taking a 35 miles per hour corner at 110 miles per hour. Came out with nothing but a swollen knee, thankfully. I will never drink and drive again. There is no need to shame me. I do that every day. Story 57. I was hospitalized for over a week for lithium toxicity. I remember none of it except for the very end of my stay. They said I was about half a day away from dying. Story 58. It is a toss-up between almost drowning and being hospitalized from a nut allergy. I do not know which one was closer, but both times I felt that calm before the darkness. Thinking back on it, it is kind of spooky, that feeling. Story 59. Catastrophic mitral valve failure with a 99% mortality rate. The patient came within minutes of dying and was even closer to brain damage. Spent nearly a week in a coma. Story 60. Passed out a few minutes after my epidural with my first child. Then kept passing out while pushing. Birth is intense. Story 61. Having my heart stopped and being placed on a cardiopulmonary bypass machine during open heart surgery when I was 4. Luckily it worked. Story 62. I attempted suicide by a massive mixed overdose 51 days ago. I ended up in a 10-day coma on life support and had major surgery because my bowel was dying. They left me open for 2 days between surgeries. I experienced delirium and a central line infection while in the hospital. I woke up in the intensive care unit with no memory of what I had done. My family was told to prepare to say their goodbyes, as the hospital did not expect me to survive. It surprised the doctors when I woke up, and even more when I was discharged after 22 days instead of the months they had predicted. Apparently, I was very lucky and beat the odds. Story 63. I had a severe obstruction in my stomach when I was about 12 years old. It was causing my stomach to feel full, and anything I tried to eat or drink made me vomit, soup, water, broth, anything. Doctors said it was just a stomach bug, gave my mother some medicine for nausea, and sent us home. The next day, after trying to eat some Jell-O, I started vomiting profusely until it became just blood. We went to the emergency room, where they discovered the obstruction and rushed me into emergency surgery. The doctors told my parents that if we had waited another day, I would not have survived. Story 64. I got caught in a rip current in Punta Cana in 2012 and had to be dragged back to shore by a small 4-foot-tall Dominican lifeguard who I owe my life to. I was a tall 30-year-old man, so I can imagine the entire resort watching this unfold in stunned amazement. Story 65. As a former outdoor adventure extreme sports enthusiast, now permanently disabled from an old construction job, I have had countless near misses. However, I believe the closest I have come to death was when I had a severe case of mononucleosis that lasted several months and almost overcame me. I lost weight when I had none to lose, similar to the slow wasting experience during cancer treatment. Something so mundane and relatively common nearly ended my life, rather than all the extreme activities I used to do that left me with constant broken bones and various injuries. Story 66. Arteriovenous malformation in my right temporal lobe, intermittently leaking blood into my brain. Imaging also disclosed an aneurysm on my middle cerebral artery. I had neurosurgery to fix both problems at once, which required 10 days in the hospital. This was immediately followed by a pulmonary embolism, resulting in 13 days in the hospital. All better now, but I am very fortunate. Story 67. I came down with severe pneumonia in 2019, was intubated for a week, and hospitalized for about a month. It was the scariest time of my life. I really thought I was going to die. Story 68. Almost bled to death due to Dieulafoy lesions. This happened over the course of a couple of days. I spit up blood one evening and went to the emergency room. They instructed me to contact my gastroenterologist and said, "Don't come back unless you're vomiting blood." The day went by while waiting for an endoscopy. The following day, nothing was found. Lesions don't typically look like ulcers. Mine were just red spots. The doctor essentially disregarded them, sent me home, and scheduled a colonoscopy. The day went by preparing for the colonoscopy. In the middle of the night, I started vomiting blood with the colonoscopy set for 7 a.m. I showed up for the colonoscopy and told my doctor I was vomiting blood that looked like red wine. By this point, I was very weak and felt like I had concrete blocks on my feet. The colonoscopy found nothing and I was sent home. Once home, I started vomiting blood again. We called an ambulance. The hospital gave me 2 blood transfusions and scheduled an emergency endoscopy for the morning. The emergency endoscopy failed. My stomach was full of blood, and I woke up in recovery with a nasogastric tube to pump my stomach. I was moved to the intensive care unit for 2 more blood transfusions. 2 days later, a successful endoscopy with clips was performed by a different gastroenterologist. The new doctor seemed invested in my case and knew exactly what was going on. Story 69. During my cancer treatment, I was very close to giving up and had already mentally acknowledged that I might not survive. But I pulled through. It made me a different person who views life differently now. I treasure every minute and no longer procrastinate. I do things now that I would never have done before. Story 70. I have had melanoma skin cancer 3 times. The first time it was found, I had not seen a dermatologist for 4 years. Story 71. To my knowledge, it was when I almost drowned as a child. I had gone with my then stepfather to his family gathering, and I was left unsupervised in the pool at about 6 years old. I was holding onto the ledge and scooting around the perimeter, but it was wet and I slipped into the deep end. Unable to swim, all I could do was run in place. The only reason I did not drown was because my ex-stepfather saw me slip and came over, reaching his arm down into the water. He did not directly grab me. I had to make my way over to him and grab his hand before he pulled me out. Story 72. A long time ago, I was driving up the Columbia River Gorge in a 1975 Chevrolet Monza when I hit a patch of wet road caused by a stream flooding the freeway. I hydroplaned across 4 lanes at around 90 miles per hour. There was no spinning, just a sideways slide directly from the fast lane to the outside slow lane. I regained control and missed the guardrail splitter for an off-ramp by less than a foot. Story 73. Pneumonia at 2 weeks old. I have heard the story on my birthday for years. I also had an eating disorder, avoidant/restrictive food intake disorder at age 15. Story 74. Woke up after a 14-hour brain tumor surgery where I almost died. I felt terrible and wanted to die. I still have post-traumatic stress disorder from it. Story 75. The one time I got mugged in the street, it was all too quick. But luckily I got punched for my troubles, which usually ends worse. Story 76. I went cliff diving at this lake despite not knowing how to swim. This lake had many life preservers in various sizes. So I decided to conquer my fear of heights and water. I jumped off a cliff about 50 feet above the water. As soon as I hit the water, the adjustable strap on the life preserver tore, and it slipped off my torso. I managed to grab the broken strap at the last second and was able to float to the surface. Felt like I was underwater for an eternity. Eventually, I surfaced and had swallowed a lot of water. My friends saw me thrashing around and came to pull me to shore. It turned out the life preserver I picked was severely sun damaged, causing the strap to tear and a piece of the yellow buoyant material to come off. I have not done that stunt since. Story 77. When I was 8, a sleeper wave came up and knocked me, my father, and his girlfriend off our feet while on a jetty. My girlfriend grabbed me by my sweatshirt before I went into the ocean. Our coast has a deadly undertow. When I was a perfectly healthy 35 years old, I collapsed with pneumonia. I was unconscious for about a month. I had 1/3 of a lung removed due to 25 years of bronchitis-caused scar tissue buildup. Story 78. I was skiing on the boundary on the Nevada side of Heavenly Valley. I lived up in Tahoe on Kingsbury Grade. I was cutting across a steep slope when it cracked below me and released. I stood at the top, untouched, and watched the slide roar down, snapping huge trees off and flipping them in the air. It crashed all the way down to Highway 207, which was closed for 2 days. My bad. Story 79. Bacterial meningitis. By the time I arrived at the hospital, doctors told my ex that I was hours away from death. I do not remember the first 2 weeks of being sick. Story 80. My stomach hurt from bowel syndrome after eating spicy chips. I am from Indonesia. In 2012, we had spicy chips from level 1 to level 10, the spiciest. This was long before the one chip challenge. I tried the level 10 chip and thought, meh, it's easy, it's not that spicy. I took it easy until around midnight when my stomach started hurting badly, and I went to the intensive care unit at 2 a.m. We eat everything with sambal in Indonesia. Your tongue might be very strong, but your stomach will react differently. Story 81. Tess drove a Pontiac Trans Am, traveling 160 miles per hour, when a car traveling 55 miles per hour almost came into my lane. It would have been over. Story 82. I aspirated amniotic fluid as a baby in the womb and had to have an emergency cesarean section. I was born not breathing and without a pulse but was resuscitated and stayed in the neonatal intensive care unit for about 3 months. I think I turned out pretty normal, other than I learned to crawl backwards first and developed a mild form of autism. Story 83. Had refereed 60 junior high school basketball games that winter 3 years ago as my retirement job. I also worked out 4 days a week. Went to the local high school basketball game on a Friday night. Woke up in a hospital 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning. Walked out the next day, Sunday. Died on my couch that Friday night, the victim of 2 clogged arteries and 1 blocked artery. My hero wife, a cardiologist, got up to go to bed and noticed I didn't look good. Her call to emergency services generated moving a heavy coffee table so she could roll me onto the floor. She administered chest compressions with emergency services directions until the ambulance arrived. Got a helicopter ride to a main heart hospital Saturday morning. Long story short, when you reach about 60 years old, talk to your doctor about a heart scan. You may not be able to beat genetics with your lifestyle, and the scan can save your family a lot of fear and worry, and a $525,000 plus bill. Story 84. When I was at the University of Texas at Austin, I was crossing the Drag, a busy street separating campus from a residential district where many students lived. I stepped into the street at the front of a large group of students and had to jump back to avoid a city bus that ran through the red light at full speed. The bus almost hit multiple students, and I learned the valuable lesson never to cross immediately after getting the walk sign. Story 85. Snowmobiling on a lake up north. Ice was not thick enough. I fell through because we did not pick up enough speed to glide over the water instead of sinking. My uncle lay flat on the ice nearby and found sturdy ground to coach us on how to pry ourselves out. Story 86. I was in a car crash and thought I had died. There was a couple of seconds that felt like forever when I fully expected to be dead. I saw my life flash before my eyes. There was a peaceful nothingness, and it felt like floating. I woke up, realized I wasn't dead, and got out of my car, freaking out. Everyone was surprised, and when paramedics arrived, They told me I was supposed to be dead. That was an intense experience. It made me not afraid of dying. I have already accepted my death. I don't want to die, but I've accepted that I will, and there's probably nothing I will be able to do about it when it happens. Strangely, it's what keeps me fighting. Story 87. I caught a terrible sickness or virus right before coronavirus hit. My mother thinks I caught coronavirus, but my friends in college were literally taking care of me and nursing me back to health, and none of them caught anything. I never went to a doctor, so I still do not know what it was I had. But it felt like I was dying. Story 88. I almost died about 1.5 years ago. I had a fall, split my skull open, requiring surgery and a traumatic brain injury. It was very scary, and I feel like it is an invisible disability because my hair grew back and I seem normal, but it affected me a lot. Story 89. Either when I had pertussis as a toddler, or when a 2-ton coil of sheet metal fell off a rack and landed about 2 meters away from me. Story 90. Pacemaker implant at age 33 went horribly wrong. The surgeon poked one of the leads through my heart and into my right lung. The lung collapsed and started filling with fluid, so I had a tube in my chest for 3 days. The area around my heart also started filling with fluid. They kept trying medication, saying if it did not work, they would have to insert a large needle to drain it, but luckily that was not necessary. Internal bleeding required 3 transfusions and resulted in 2 large hematomas. It was a 6-month recovery with constant complications and lasting nerve damage at the battery site. Story 91. A man ran a red light driving about 60 miles per hour while I was crossing. I had my headphones in and just happened to look up at the last moment and stopped. His side view mirror grazed my shirt as he passed. I still think about that from time to time. Story 92. I have a few experiences to share. I was an active heroin addict for about 10 years, which led to a couple of overdoses. One required resuscitation, and the other was reversed with a dose of naloxone. About 6 years ago, I was hospitalized for over a month with pneumonia in both lungs, sepsis, which eventually progressed to septic shock, kidney failure, and endocarditis. To address the endocarditis, I had heart valve replacement surgery about 2 weeks into my hospital stay to remove a large mass of bacteria from my heart. Initially, they administered high doses of intravenous antibiotics, but these were ineffective. I was also placed on dialysis due to chronic kidney failure. My body was in very poor condition, and the doctor told my dad that I had about a 30% chance of surviving the surgery. Story 93. I guess it is a tie between the nuchal cord issue and when I fell about 2 feet backwards, head first onto concrete. The nuchal cord wrapped around my neck and shoulder, leaving me completely immobile. Doctors did not notice until 15 days past my due date, after my mother insisted they check. They saw the issue, became alarmed, and rushed me to be delivered using vacuum assistance. My heart stopped at some point during the process and I was resuscitated. The fall is significant because those types of head injuries tend to be fatal more often than not, yet I just got up and walked away without even a concussion. Story 94. I had double pneumonia once in both lungs. I literally wanted to die. Every cough felt like I was breaking my ribs. I took a bottle of cough syrup called promethazine with codeine. I did not realize you were only supposed to sip it, but all I wanted to do was sleep and not cough. I did not realize just how sick I was. Story 95. I was 15 years old and had just started drinking. One day, I was having a few drinks, and after my mother went to bed, I foolishly decided to have 9 strong drinks and 4 shots back-to-back of moonshine, which is high-percentage homemade liquor. My mother heard strange noises coming from the living room that she usually thought were possums, but she felt a strong urge to check what it was. She saw me on my back, skin pale, lips blue, convulsing, and choking on my own vomit. I had severe alcohol poisoning, and if she had not come to check on me when she did, I most likely would have died. Story 96. Almost drowned when I was 3. Almost kidnapped when I was 5. Woke up with a severe systemic allergic reaction when I was 17 and needed intravenous medications including epinephrine. Had allergy testing done, and the doctor said the best explanation was that I swallowed a brown recluse spider in my sleep. When I was 27 and pregnant with my son, I developed preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome, which involves low platelets, liver failure, and low red blood cells at 30 weeks pregnant. We are both fine now. Currently, I am dealing with some concerning symptoms including heart palpitations, shortness of breath, chest pain, high blood pressure in the range of 150/105, fatigue, and coughing. Palpitations have been occurring for years. The other symptoms have appeared in the past couple of weeks and have been increasing in intensity. Story 97. I got stuck upside down in a pool in an inner tube, which got caught on the ladder as I tried to get in and then popped out, flinging me upside down. Thankfully, my mother was nearby to hear my siblings yelling. Story 98. In 2021, I had pneumonia in both lungs and an impacted bowel. I guess I had an enema. Life went on, and I went back to the emergency room on August 31st by myself because my kids lived out of province and were coming home for Labor Day. I had the same symptoms, and they said I should go to a hospital that had a CT scanner because our health center did not. I went home, and the next morning I could barely move. I called 911 and woke up 6 days later. They thought I had an anoxic brain injury, but I was lucky. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. I had double lung pneumonia, blood clots, and irregular heartbeats. If I had waited a couple of hours, I would have been dead. Story 99. Hawaii, rip current. Scared me greatly. I had a life vest on, but I was not in my best shape to swim for a long duration. Story 100. When I was 2 years old, I got swept in by a riptide on a family vacation to the beach. My father ended up saving my life after performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I have had a few close calls where my life was at risk since then, but that was the one moment when I was absolutely going to die. I was very lucky that my father got there in time. Story 101. Nearly drowned once when I was quite young. I remember being pulled down by the river current. Luckily, my mother was a strong swimmer. Story 102. Probably when I crashed my sports car into a concrete power pole, leaving live electricity flowing through and around the car. I was 20 and an idiot. Story 103. I had an asthma attack last November. I had a cold and an infection that caused fluid to fill my lungs, leading to respiratory failure. I was in a coma and intubated for 2 days. They tried to wake me up 4 times, but I did not improve, so they sedated me again. Thankfully, I do not remember that part. I have also had my heart and breathing stop during opiate overdoses 3 times. Each time it was temporary, and I recovered. I have had 5 near-death experiences in my life. Story 104. I was standing on a guard tower in Helmand Valley, Afghanistan. I had only been there for about 5 minutes when a burst of bullets snapped and cracked past my head, hitting the wooden frame of the guard tower 6 inches from my head, sending wooden splinters everywhere. Since I didn't have anything to shoot back with, I immediately leaped off the tower. The machine gunner next to me started to return fire. I don't know what he was shooting at. The Taliban do not mess around with cover and concealment. I have at least 15 other stories like that. That was just a random Wednesday that I happened to remember. Story 105. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. For some reason, it has caused my body to no longer recognize internal infections like urinary tract infections, for example. Instead of fighting the infection, my body does nothing, allowing it to spread and attack the rest of my body. The first time this happened was 3 to 5 years ago. I was fine one moment, then suddenly felt like I was going to pass out and never wake up again. When I arrived at the hospital, I didn't know what to say, other than thinking I was going to die. The medical team agreed and immediately ran tests, then treated me with intravenous antibiotics and fluids. The emergency room doctor said that if I had not come in, it was likely I would have passed away at home overnight. Story 106. I was seconds away from blacking out because I was choking on bacon. It was so stringy that it got stuck in my throat. My dad performed the Heimlich maneuver, but it did not work. In my last moments, I pushed most of my hand down my throat and managed to get everything out. Everyone agreed I was an idiot for stealing everyone's bacon. Now, I make sure to cook it super crispy every time. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.